The road into Pine Hollow Forest ended where the map said it should continue. Evan Carter slowed his Jeep and leaned forward over the steering wheel, staring at the cracked asphalt that simply stopped. Beyond it, a narrow dirt trail vanished into the trees like something half erased by time. No sign, no marker, no warning, just forest. He cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, unnatural, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that made your ears ring. The wind barely moved the branches. Even the birds seemed to avoid this place. Evan checked his phone. No signal, of course. He grabbed his camera, recorder, and flashlight, then stepped out. The air smelled old, like wet leaves and rust. He was here because of a letter. 3 days ago, it had arrived at his apartment in Seattle. No return address, only one sentence written in shaky ink. If you want the truth about the Holloway family, go where the road disappears. The Holloway case was a local legend from the late 1990s, a family of 3 that vanished from Pine Hollow without a trace. Police labeled it a runaway situation. The town buried it. Everyone moved on. Except the forest. Evan followed the dirt trail. It twisted between towering pines, the canopy blocking most of the sunlight. After nearly 20 minutes of walking, he noticed something strange. The forest grew quiet, not gradually, suddenly. No wind, no insects, no birds, just the sound of his own breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. That was when he saw it, the cabin. It stood between the trees as if the forest had grown around it instead of the other way around. Dark wood, collapsed porch, broken windows. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired spine. It looked abandoned, yet wrong. No graffiti, no vandalism, no signs of explorers. Almost preserved. Evan raised his camera and snapped several photos. As he stepped onto the porch, the wood groaned loudly beneath his weight. He froze, listening. Nothing answered. The front door hung slightly open. He pushed it. The smell hit him first, damp wood, mold, and something faintly metallic. Inside, dust coated everything, but the furniture remained arranged like someone had simply stepped out for dinner and never returned. A plate still sat on the table, a cup lay tipped over, the dried outline of coffee still visible. A child's shoe rested near the stairs. Evan swallowed. He turned on his recorder. Field notes, Pine Hollow Cabin. This place is untouched. Then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. Fresh mud. Boot prints, clear and sharp, crossing the dusty floor. Someone had been here recently. He followed the prints toward the back of the cabin. They stopped near the fireplace. On the stone, barely visible, was a dark stain. He touched it with his glove. Dry, crusted, blood. The temperature inside the cabin felt colder than outside. Evan moved slowly upstairs. The floor creaked with every step. At the top, a narrow hallway led to 2 bedrooms and an attic door. The first room was empty except for a small bed and a cracked mirror. The second, children's drawings covered the walls. Stick figures, trees, a house, and over again, written in red crayon, "Don't let him hear you." Evan's breath caught. He raised his flashlight. The attic door was locked with a heavy metal latch from the outside. Why would someone lock an attic from the outside? A sound came from below. Footsteps. Evan froze. He listened, heart pounding. The sound moved slowly across the floor of the cabin, then stopped. "Hello?" he called, his voice barely steady. Silence. He backed toward the stairs. When he reached the living room, the cabin was empty. No movement, no open door, only the fresh prints. Outside, dusk had fallen. He didn't remember the sun setting. He hurried back to his Jeep. When he reached the clearing, his chest tightened. All 4 tires were slashed. He stood there in the dying light, the forest watching him. He knew then this was not a ghost story. This was a crime scene, and someone was still protecting it. He slept in the Jeep that night, the recorder running. At 2:17 a.m., it captured something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps circling the vehicle, and a voice whispering just outside the glass. She never left. A pale gray light seeped through the trees and across Evan Carter's windshield, waking him from a shallow, restless sleep. His muscles ached from staying curled in the driver's seat all night. The recorder still blinked red on the dashboard. He sat up slowly and checked the doors. Locked. The forest looked ordinary again, birds calling, leaves shifting in the breeze, as if nothing unnatural had happened. But the whisper replayed in his head. She never left. Evan played back the recorder. At 2:17 a.m., the sound of slow footsteps circled the Jeep, then the voice. Too clear, too close. No wind distortion, no animal interference. A human voice. Someone had been standing inches from his window. He tried his phone again, still no signal. The Jeep wasn't going anywhere. He would have to walk to the ranger station nearly 8 miles away, but he wasn't leaving yet, not after what he'd found. He packed his gear, locked the vehicle, and returned to the cabin. Morning light made the place look smaller, less threatening, but the wrongness remained. The forest still felt like it was holding its breath. Inside, nothing had changed. The muddy footprints were still there. Evan followed them again, this time noticing something he had missed. The prints led to the fireplace, and some disappeared behind the iron grate. He pulled the grate aside. Behind it, a narrow crack in the stone revealed a thin metal handle. His pulse spiked. He pulled. The section of stone slid outward with a soft grind, revealing a dark stairwell descending beneath the cabin. A hidden basement. No mention of it in any record he'd read. He flicked on his flashlight and descended. The air below was colder, stale, thick with the smell of rot and chemicals. The stairs ended in a small concrete room. The beam of his flashlight swept across the walls. His stomach turned. A rusted hospital bed sat against one wall, leather restraints still attached. Medical equipment lay scattered across a metal table. A broken video camera rested on the floor. In the corner, a child's bed. Evan's breath came out shaky. Someone had lived down here. Someone had been held. On the far wall, he found scratches, dozens of them, uneven, desperate, like fingernails dragging against concrete. Above the marks, carved into the wall, Lily. The name made his skin prickle. Lily Holloway, the missing child. Evan photographed everything. His hands shook as he did. Back upstairs, he searched the cabin more carefully. In the master bedroom, he discovered a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay a stack of documents wrapped in plastic. Police reports, medical forms, psychological evaluations, all stamped with the county seal, all marked confidential. The name on the top file, Daniel Holloway. Father, husband, suspect. The files painted a different story than the one the town remembered. Daniel reported hearing voices in the forest, claimed something was calling to his daughter. Doctors recommended hospitalization. The case notes stopped abruptly 3 days before the family vanished. At the bottom of the stack lay a photograph. A little girl, about 6 years old, staring straight into the camera. Lily. Evan's chest tightened. Her eyes looked older than her face. He packed the files and left the cabin. The walk to town felt longer than it should have. every step he felt watched. Pine Hollow itself looked like a town that time had forgotten. One main street, a diner, a sheriff's office, and a handful of boarded shops. Inside the diner, conversations dropped when Evan entered. He ordered coffee and asked the waitress about the Holloway family. Her face drained of color. "You shouldn't be asking about them," she whispered. An old man at the counter finally spoke. "Everyone knows that family was cursed." He told Evan the town had heard screams coming from the cabin at night. Lights flickered in the windows. Then one morning, the place was empty. The sheriff back then ruled it a disappearance. No crime, no bodies. But the man leaned closer. The forest kept their secret. Evan visited the county records office. The Holloway case file had been partially sealed by order of the sheriff's department. The same sheriff still in office. That night, Evan returned to the cabin. The trap door in the basement was open. He was certain he had closed it. A cold feeling settled in his chest. He raised his flashlight. From deep inside the darkness below, he heard breathing. Slow, steady, human. The days that followed Jason's disappearance were like walking through a storm with no shelter. Ethan Cole felt it in every fiber of this body, the constant weight of guilt pressing down, the suffocating knowledge that one moment of panic had destroyed lives. Millfield, normally a town of quiet routines, seemed to pulse with suspicion. Neighbors watched each other from behind curtains. Every passing glance felt accusing. Ethan couldn't escape the feeling that the walls themselves were closing in. Detective Clara Hayes had been relentless. Every day she pieced together the chain of events. She interviewed shop employees, neighbors, and friends of Jason. A meticulous woman in her early 40s, Clara noticed patterns that others overlooked. She saw the tension in Ethan's body, the nervous twitch when he was questioned, and the subtle inconsistencies in his statements. "You're worried about something," Clara said softly one afternoon, her sharp eyes fixed on Ethan over a cup of coffee at the local diner. "I'm worried about the shop," Ethan replied automatically, forcing a casual smile. "It's a mess right now, a lot of work to catch up on." Clara didn't miss a beat. "You're not worried about Jason." Ethan choked on his coffee, coughing, trying to regain composure. He hated the way Clara could see straight through him, could see the guilt he had tried so desperately to bury. He wanted to run, to disappear into the shadows where no one could find him, but he knew that would only make things worse. Meanwhile, rumors in Millfield had begun to take a darker tone. People whispered in hushed tones about Ethan, about Jason's sudden disappearance, about the strange noises around the shop at night. Friends avoided him, and even those closest to him, his younger brother, his longtime neighbor, began noticing his restless energy, his sleepless nights, the way he jumped at the sound of any footstep outside. Ethan's paranoia became almost unbearable. He started seeing threats where none existed. The mailman's friendly wave became suspicious. A dog barking in the distance sounded like an accusation. He even suspected his own reflection in the shop windows of mocking him. Every corner of Millfield seemed to remind him of that night, of the accident that had become murder. One evening, as Ethan closed the shop, he noticed a shadow moving near the back alley. Heart hammering, he froze. A figure stepped into the dim light, and for a terrifying moment, he thought it was Jason returning, alive and furious. But it was Clara, flashlight in hand, notebook tucked under her arm. "Evening, Ethan," she said calmly, her voice cutting through his panic like a blade. "Mind if I ask a few questions about the shop?" Ethan swallowed hard. Sure, come in." His hands were clammy, his thoughts racing. Clara's calm demeanor was more frightening than anger. It made him realize just how vulnerable he truly was. She circled the shop slowly, eyes scanning every corner, every tool, every surface. "Jason was here the other night, closing time. Do you remember what happened?" Ethan's mind scrambled. I don't. Nothing unusual." Clara stopped near the back, her gaze piercing. "The tire tracks. You left them there, didn't you?" Ethan's stomach dropped. How could she know? He tried to mask his panic, but the trembling in his hands betrayed him. Clara was meticulous, methodical. She would see through any lie, catch him in any inconsistency. The noose tightened. By this point, Ethan's mental state had begun to unravel completely. He stopped sleeping at night, haunted by dreams of Jason's face, pale and accusing. He started to imagine that the town itself was watching him, that every stranger on the street was there to expose his secret. In these nightmares, Millfield became a labyrinth of suspicion and judgment, and he was trapped at the center. Then came the first shock of the unraveling. While rummaging through Jason's belongings, something he hadn't planned, a desperate attempt to understand and control the situation, Ethan discovered evidence that others in Millfield might have motives against Jason. A series of old grudges, unpaid debts, and secret rivalries painted a picture far more complicated than he had imagined. Suddenly, the town was no longer just an audience to his panic, it was a minefield of hidden agendas. This revelation, however, didn't make Ethan feel safer. Instead, it drove him deeper into fear. He realized that even if he survived his own guilt, the town might turn on him anyway. He became increasingly erratic, showing up late at work, avoiding neighbors, sometimes speaking to himself in whispers as he tried to plan his next move. Clara, meanwhile, closed in. She pieced together the timeline of Jason's last known movements, connected dots that Ethan hadn't considered, and subtly tested him with questions designed to provoke a reaction. She was careful, patient, and unrelenting, a predator in human form, watching her prey flail helplessly. One night, Ethan decided to confront the growing tension head-on. He returned to the alley behind the shop, the site of his worst panic, and stared at the shadows as though Jason might rise from them. In his mind, he rehearsed what he would do if confronted, if Clara or anyone else found out. But reality was crueler than imagination. As he knelt to examine the ground, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, deliberate, steady, inhumanely calm. Clara emerged from the darkness, flashlight catching the glint of sweat on Ethan's brow. She didn't need to speak, her eyes said enough. Ethan knew in that moment that the walls had closed in entirely. There was nowhere left to hide, nowhere to run. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft but authoritative, "it's time to tell me the truth." He stammered, panic and desperation overwhelming him. He tried to manipulate, to plead, to explain it away, but every word fell flat under Clara's unflinching gaze. The truth of his actions, the murder he had committed in a moment of terror, hung between them like a storm cloud ready to break. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The quiet town of Millfield, with its sleeping streets and familiar houses, seemed to lean in, waiting for the inevitable. Every secret, every small lie, every careless mistake had led to this confrontation,
and Ethan, the young man whose panic had caused a life to be lost, finally realized that there would be no escape from the consequences of his actions. He bolted. Panic fueled his limbs as he ran through the alley, heart hammering, the town itself seeming to stretch and twist around him. He knew that escape was impossible, but desperation blinded him to reason. The chase had begun, a deadly game of cat and mouse between a man driven by fear and a detective whose patience was as sharp as a scalpel. The part ended with Ethan disappearing into the maze of Millfield streets, shadows swallowing him, and Clara following relentlessly. The audience is left on the edge of their seats, wondering whether Ethan would escape or would the town finally claim its reckoning.
Evan stared at the photo until his hands began to shake. The cabin in the image was intact, not condemned, not boarded up, not surrounded by investigators. The roof sagged exactly as he remembered. The trees leaned around it in the same unnatural way. The light in the attic window glowed a sickly yellow. And the girl's face, pale, hollow-eyed, too familiar. Lily. His phone vibrated again. Unknown. You were warned. Evan immediately called the state investigator assigned to the case. She confirmed what he already knew. The cabin had been sealed that morning. No one was inside. No one allowed near it. So how had the photo been taken? Evan drove back to the forest. Rain soaked the windshield, the road slick and dark. His headlights cut thin tunnels through the trees. The closer he got, the heavier the air became, as if the forest itself resisted him. When he reached the clearing, the cabin stood exactly as in the photo. Whole, breathing. The police tape lay shredded on the ground. The front door was open. Evan stepped inside. The furniture was gone. The dust was gone. The place looked reset, clean, empty. But the smell remained. Downstairs, the hidden stairwell was open again. He descended. The basement was unchanged. The child's bed, the restraints, the scratches on the wall. And something new. Fresh, muddy footprints leading deeper into the darkness. At the far wall, a door now stood where there had been only stone before. Evan pushed it open. The room beyond was lit by candles. A woman sat on the floor, her back to him, hair long and tangled, humming softly. "Lily?" he whispered. She turned. Her face was older than the girl in the tapes, but the eyes were the same. "Daniel was right," she said calmly. "The forest never forgets." Evan backed away, heart pounding. "You're free now. They can help you." She smiled. They already tried. The lights went out. Evan ran. When he burst from the cabin, it was gone. Only forest remained. The next morning, the authorities found Evan wandering the highway in shock. The official report stated that the cabin had collapsed during the storm the previous night. No basement, no evidence. Just trees. Weeks later, Evan's article won national awards. But sometimes, late at night, his phone vibrates. Always the same photo. The cabin, the attic light, the girl watching. The forest still has its secret, and it's not finished.